virtual. I'm Cynthia Cleto. I lead the outreach and entrepreneurship efforts at Mount Sinai Innovation Partners. So happy midweek prior to the week where all of us are going to have a food fest next week. Or maybe you just celebrate Festivus, not sure. But hopefully you have a good time with your families next week. We are here with Eriks Lium. He is the Chief Commercial Innovation Officer of the health system and also leads MSIP, the commercialization office. Just like most of you, Erik did his PhD, did his postdoc, spent hours, countless hours pipetting in the lab. Just like you, he also has come into a point at one point in his life where he's trying to decide whether he'd like to do the traditional academic route. I met Erik and his team about 5 years ago, and he spoke so highly about what the team does, and it actually interested me so much that I left my corporate job that I've been in the industry I've been in with Elsevier, Springer and Nature for about 15 years and joined this group, Mount Sinai Innovation Partners. Now, I have a few questions that I wanted to ask Erik, but to be honest, this is your time. So if you feel that you'd like to ask some questions that I'm not asking, please message Juan Quijano so you can see him in the chat, or just raise your hand. Yeah, there you go, Juan, and we'll unmute you, okay? So this is your time with him. Please ask away, but I'll start us off to begin with, all right? Welcome, Erik. Happy Wednesday.
Happy Wednesday, and thanks for the invitation.
Of course. I wanted to start off a little bit earlier in your life before all the college and graduate school. Can you recall the first time you knew you were interested in science?
Yeah, I don't know if I would say that it necessarily is specifically science, but what I can recall as a very young child is that I was always interested in how things worked. I was always asking why and how. And, that really led me to ultimately pursue science in, high school and then in, of course, undergraduate and graduate school. But I've always been extremely curious about how things work and why they happen a certain way. And, I think that's really what led me to pursue science.
Great. And later on in your life, what was graduate school like for you?
Graduate school was, very challenging. I did my graduate work at Columbia University, and I should take a step back and just also point out that even though I was very curious and interested in science initially, when I started my undergraduate work, I thought that I would go into medicine. And as I took courses and went through my undergraduate education, I began to lean toward going into science, pursuing the PhD versus an MD, and ultimately went in that direction. With what I know today, I might go, if I could go back, I might go back and actually pursue medicine as well. But I certainly feel that the education that I received in pursuing science was really valuable and a good thing to do. You asked about graduate school, and so when I began graduate school, I did rotations like most people do. I joined one laboratory and published a few papers and managed to complete my degree. But along the way, I also started thinking about, did I want to go into academics as a career, or did I want to try something else? But graduate school, I guess, was long hours, lots of work, as you said at the beginning, pipetting. I can remember sitting at the bench or sitting in a in a cell culture hood with hundreds of plates sitting in front of me at times. And so, yeah, I did all the same kind of work that many of you do, and it was phenomenally rewarding.
Great. How big was your lab? How many folks were in the lab at Columbia?
As I say, it wasn't my lab, but the lab that I joined was, it's been a lot of years, but there was about, I think there was probably in the neighborhood of 10 or 12 of us. There was obviously graduate students. We also had interns that were working with us from, I can think of one intern specifically from, I think, high school, and then potentially college as well. And then, of course, we had postdocs and then our principal investigator. Because our lab worked on herpes simplex viruses as well as human papillomavirus, we also had, a fairly active relationship with clinicians or the clinical side of the organization as well. And so we had a few people that were more focused on, I'd say, later stage translational work related to particularly HPV.
And of the folks, I'm kind of like somehow interested in the folks in the lab. Were there other folks in that lab that kind of went into business or law or something else other than the traditional route?
Well, it depends. The answer to your question depends on when, right? When we're asking the question. And so there's members, I can think of members in the lab that went into academia. I can definitely think of members that went into industry. But I can also think of colleagues or fellow graduate students that one in particular who went into law, and in fact, immediately after completing his PhD, he joined a kind of a formal program with one of the large law firms here in New York that enabled individuals to, with PhDs, to both work in law and get a law degree at the same time.
Got it. I'm also curious, during graduate school, when was the moment or inkling that you started to think, oh, I'm interested in business?
I don't know if there was any specific moment. I guess my general curiosity, again, from when I was, just a small child, made me curious about a lot of different things. Science was one of them. One of the things that I noticed during graduate school is that I often participated in conversations with members of, on the business side, members of the supply companies that we worked with. And then also I had, other friends and, family member. My wife was actually in law and so the law and the business side of law in particular. And so, I got some experience in terms of seeing people in those different careers, and I just was interested. I also had an opportunity to do some industry funded research when I was in graduate school as well. And, that ultimately led to an interest. I don't think there was any one kind of aha moment. I certainly thought seriously about different choices. One of the choices that I did make quite, and ultimately quite deliberately, was I decided that versus, say, changing course and doing something prior to completing my PhD, I felt that completing my PhD, completing my degree was important. And for me, at least, that ultimately, I would say, was a good decision because, once you have that degree, I think it's extremely supportive in terms of your career going forward, regardless of what field you ultimately pursue.
Mm-hmm. And during this time, can you speak about some of the mentors that helped you along the way, whether they're internal or external to your academic environment?
Yeah, sure. One of the general comments, and I think Cynthia knows, so she's asking the questions. I think mentors are extremely important, right? That having individuals that you can talk with and get advice from, and that are familiar with the industry that you're interested in or what you're trying to do is extremely important. And so, I've had different mentors throughout my career. Now, obviously, one of my most, crucial or important mentors was my mentor in graduate school, my thesis advisor. And he was extremely important in guiding me, guiding my science and what have you. And as someone that I consider a great friend. As my activities progressed, beyond graduate school, I had different kinds of mentors. I've had mentors that were extremely helpful in advising on creating a company, how to do it, how, what, when, strategy. And so, again, I think mentors are really important, and it's good to seek them out.
Were those external mentors, the folks that were helping you on strategy and company formation?
Yeah, both internal and external. Ultimately, when I pursued developing a company, after kind of taking a leave of absence from my postdoc, the mentors were all external to the institution that I was at. But this was 1999. This is a long time ago, and whereas I would say at Mount Sinai Innovation Partners, we try to really provide that kind of mentorship internally to individuals when they need it.
And so what happened next after graduate degree, postdoc?
Well, as I alluded to a moment ago, during my postdoc, I had some ideas that I thought might be the basis for starting a company. And so I pursued that and worked with another individual and worked on writing a business plan and identifying individuals that could, ultimately I contacted one individual that could be a potential mentor. And after a number of months was able to have a meeting with that individual, who was, a well-known individual in the biotech industry. And that individual introduced me to more people. And that led to, I can't remember if it was having 3 or 4 advisors that ultimately helped us to develop the strategy further and then ultimately to raise venture capital for the company.
How did that pan out? So forming the company, raising money, yeah.
We were, it depends on, there's a lot of forces that come into play when you think about the success or failures or challenges or what have you. We developed a business plan and raised venture capital. It happened to be at a time that became very challenging from a fundraising perspective, and not so different from what we're experiencing right now, where markets went down significantly. And when I say markets, I mean for example, the New York Stock Exchange, the NASDAQ, that valuations of public companies went down significantly, which resulted in venture capital groups funding less and less. There was just generally a reduction in the level of risk that individuals would take. And so during that time period, it became very challenging, but we were ultimately able to develop the company and move forward.
Okay. Just also wanted to ask, because I think a lot of folks will ask leaders, what's your biggest success? I would like to ask, what was your biggest failure? And how were you able to address that and maybe get past it in order to launch or create something new, different, and exciting?
Yeah, you know, I don't know, biggest failure, I would say I've made plenty of mistakes along the way. I always try to learn from them, and I try to share, what I've learned with other people. One of the things that I've learned over the years is that it's very important to vet ideas extensively. So if you have an idea and you think it's a good idea, and your friends think it's a good idea, and your significant other thinks it's a good idea, and what have you, doesn't mean it's a good idea. It's one of the things that Steve Blank created that I'm sure a number of you are familiar with, which is the innovation core, but really more not innovation core per se, but the concept of customer discovery. The concept of customer discovery is really specifically, if you've got an idea, go out and talk with potential customers, talk with people that would be in the industry that you're interested in, people that you might be selling to, or people that might be partners or companies or what have you, and really test your idea. Figure out, is the idea that you think is good, does everyone else think that it's good? Questions like, if I build this product, would you buy it? And if they said yes, well, how much would you pay for it? And if they gave you what would I need to do to get you, almost to the point of, what would it take to get a purchase order if I build it? Now there's a lot of other kinds of advice that you can get as well, in terms of what should the product be, how do you build the product, what are the pitfalls, what does the regulatory landscape look like? Because obviously we're working in healthcare, so you may have a great idea, but there may be technical issues that are extremely complex that ultimately get in the way. But also you have to keep in mind that there's an entire regulatory framework. The healthcare industry is a highly regulated industry, and it's very important to understand all of the regulatory processes and the strategies and what have you. Obviously, if you're developing a drug, there's one set of kind of development and regulatory issues that you have to be aware of. And there's similar things for a medical device or for a diagnostic, but they're different. And then it's also different if you're in the United States versus Europe versus other parts of the world. So again, I'm giving you a little bit longer answer than I think you were asking for, but if we go back to where we started, I'd say, one of the things that I've learned over the years is that you have to be very careful about making sure that what you think is an idea is really actually a good idea and is really feasible, and there's a real market, and it takes research to do that.
Thank you for emphasizing customer discovery, because we're actually in the middle of our I-Core program, and some of the folks on the line are in that program. So they're very, very well aware of what they have to present in the coming weeks. Also, our entrepreneurship program and our boot camps are chock full of customer discovery concepts. So the programs that Juan runs, and most of you probably have had experience with our fellows program, as well as our entrepreneurship bootcamp. If any of that resonated with you, what Erik just said about validating that your innovation has a market and has good product market fit, then please join us at our entrepreneurship bootcamp and sprint programs, okay? All right, maybe I can pause here for a second as well, and just check in the room if any of you have any questions. Please put it in the chat or just raise your hand and we can unmute you, and you can also ask the question directly of Erik. And there's about 86 people, so I can't imagine no one has a question. Phil Williams.
Sure. I have a question. I sent it to Juan, so I don't know if Juan wants to read it, or you want to take it from here, Juan?
Go ahead.
All right. So Erik, question for you. In your past, Are there any examples of where you learned what you definitely did not want to do by watching other peers or leaders where you said, you know, that's definitely something I don't want to emulate going forward?
Oh, there's a lot of examples. That's a broad question. You know, why don't I take that question from the perspective of career, right? Because you're going to learn about, you know, a lot of different things, like who you want to emulate versus who you don't want to emulate, or the kind of behaviors or what have you. But from a career perspective, what I learned along the way was that, and I watched other people, and again, I was in an environment that was supportive. I saw other, you know, other friends and colleagues, graduate students that were, again, like I mentioned earlier, one went into law, others went into business. And so, you know, for myself, there came a point where, you know, I really needed to think about, you know, do I want to continue just in basic science? Do I want to take a step back and go get a, you know, get a medical degree and have that experience as well? And if I did that, well, what would I, you know, how would that work? What would I then do? And how would that change things? If I stayed in basic science, you know, did I see myself running a laboratory and writing grants and what have you? You know, and one of the things that I realized for me is that I love doing science. I really enjoyed being at the bench. I liked doing experiments, but I didn't like some other aspects of what it would have taken to run my own lab. And ultimately, I realized there was an opportunity, and this is where we, you know, myself and another individual worked together as partners to try to create a company. And what the realization was is there was an opportunity to try to do something that could potentially accelerate science and more broadly have a positive impact than I could, you know, in my own career as a scientist at the bench. And so we took a chance to create something that would accelerate science more broadly, and be useful for, you know, useful very broadly. But part of the reason that we did that is, at least why I did that, is I also realized that I didn't see myself, you know, in the role of grant writing and running a laboratory per se. Now, one of the things that I also find extremely rewarding and am really committed to is mentorship and, you know, being supportive of people. You know, I had people that supported me, and I should do the same to support others in their career and developing, you know, new ideas or companies or what have you. And so the role that I have now, and the, you know, the role that I ultimately was given an opportunity to pursue and develop, is one where I get to do that. And so I thoroughly enjoy what I do now, and the opportunity to actually play a role in helping people and training and advising, and everything related to that. So I don't know, Phil, if there was other specific questions or sub questions that you have, but I answered the career portion of that.
Thanks, Phil. We have a few more questions from the audience. Mary C. George asks, in seeking venture funding, what were the top 3 key issues you found were successful, and what were a waste of time?
So first of all, that's a great question. And Phil, yours was a great question as well. But when I initially, with a partner, started to pursue the idea of a company, it was in 1999. So you may recall that the dot-com bubble, the first, kind of the big dot-com bubble, quote, ended in roughly March, the end of March of 2000. So when we initially started, there was a lot of kind of venture capital events, and you could go and you could try to meet people. And I didn't find those activities particularly useful. There were some, there were some learning opportunities, but I found that there was too much competition and too many people and too much of a distracting environment. So what I found to work was specific introductions from people who know venture capitalists, right? So there's individuals that obviously have long-standing relationships with investors and can make introductions for you. So if you meet someone, there's an advisor, a mentor, and they think that what you're doing is really interesting, and they make an introduction to an investor, there's a much higher probability that you'll get a meeting and have the opportunity to really have a conversation to potentially pursue funding. Sorry, Cynthia, I know I'm only covering part of the question, so just remind me.
So 3 key issues you found were successful in seeking venture funding, and what was a waste of time?
So again, I think in terms of maximizing use of time and what have you, go through contacts, get introductions that are, specifically. I think also when you meet with, particularly, I was a postdoc, right? I hadn't run a business. I didn't. So this is my number 2 piece of advice. I hadn't run a business, and it was very important when we went out to raise capital that we were clear that we weren't going to run the company, right? That if you're seeking capital from a venture capital organization, they are going to want to bring in seasoned leadership that's already run companies, which doesn't mean that you as a founder don't have an important role. It just means that there might be a CEO or a chief financial officer at some point, or a chief scientific officer. And you may end up in one of those roles, but I think particularly in venture, you have to be open to the fact that initially, those are probably not the roles for you, unless you've got past experience where you've already run a business or built a business. So do I have to come up with 3? I have to think of one more.
I mean, if there is one right now.
Well, so things have changed, because back then in 1999, we wrote formal business plans. And now, at least in my opinion, everything really runs off of presentations, so slide decks. And so you need a really good slide deck, and you have to really focus on what are the questions that an investor is going to ask. How can you present that information? So before you ever meet with a potential investor, it's good to test run your presentation, how you present, the content with others, so that you can get a lot of questions and you can modify and you can adapt your presentation, because what investors are going to ask, and the issue, some of the issues that they're going to be concerned about are relatively consistent across different investors. And if you can't answer those things, that'll create problems. That'll slow the process down. And so you want to make sure that you really address, for example, the things that you learn through customer discovery, but also, you have to have some idea of financials, forecasting, what's going to happen over the first couple of years. How much money do you need? What are you going to do with that money? How far are you going to get? What are the potential risks and pitfalls? Who's the competition? How could the competition directly or indirectly affect you? What's the intellectual property landscape look like? Do you have patents? Do you have copyrights? Is it a trade secret issue? So there's many issues that you have to think about, and your presentation needs to pretty succinctly and clearly present that kind of information. And again, Innovation Partners and the courses that you're taking, and Cynthia and Juan and the team, we can all help with providing that kind of advice. And we can make introductions as well.
Great. Thank you, Eric. We have a few more questions from the audience. There's one from Tiffen, but before Tiffen, maybe Gaurav, you've had your hand up. Did you want to ask Eric a question?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Cynthia. Hi, Eric. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you mentioned that you actually took a leave of absence from your postdoc in order to develop the business plan and do all the work that was needed to start your company. Did you make that choice because you realized that you simply cannot do both at the same time? And what were the considerations you had to make? Because that's a big choice if one has to take it.
Yeah, and that was a big choice. And at the time, keep in mind, at the time, this was the dot-com boom. Things were moving extremely fast. It's a different situation right now. So I made the choice, and I had the ability to do it, to take a leave of absence, and I kind of gave myself 6 months-ish to see what I could do. And ultimately, we raised capital in about 6 months. Now, in the current market conditions that we're in, where it's very challenging, I might do things differently. But certainly part of my answer is I have to recognize everybody's got different circumstances and different issues and what have you. But I did take a leave of absence. Now I ultimately, we built the company, so I didn't go back to my postdoc, but I didn't just leave. I took a leave of absence because I didn't know if things would work out or not in terms of developing the company. So again, my point is, right, I guess philosophically also is, it's important not to, whatever the right analogy is, close doors or, not have the opportunity to potentially take a step back because you might need it someday. And so anyway, did I answer your question?
Perfect. Thanks, Gaurav, for your question. Before we go to MD, I'd like to go to Tiffen. She has entered a question in the chat. How can MSIP help to identify business partners to build a team to move research idea to startup? What are the key elements to identify good partners?
I almost feel like I should actually pass that question back to Cynthia or Juan, or one of the members of MSIP is here, who's here. So MSIP, all of us have contacts, and so we all have networks that we can actually tap into. We also have executives or entrepreneurs in residence at MSIP who are very knowledgeable. They know a lot about business, as we do. They've been in the industry for a long time, and they can be actually very helpful as well. We do have business advisors, a formal advisory group with MSIP. And so, I think there's a lot of opportunities for MSIP to help, but also you can ask other people, your friends, your colleagues, people that for recommendations of individuals that you might want to meet, you might want to talk with. And remember what I said earlier, I started with one person that I thought could be an advisor, who became a mentor when we were making the decision to try to start a company. And that one person turned into 3 or 4, right? And so it was a process, and it took some months to actually do all of that. And then in terms of characteristics, I think it's important to find individuals, or to have individuals advising you that they understand the industry that you're in, the market that you're in, the kind of product that you're proposing to develop. Individuals that have experience, as advisors or mentors, throughout their careers. Individuals that are, supportive. I probably could go on and on in terms of the kinds of characteristics I would look for in terms of knowledge and experience and professionalism and, you know, what have you. But, you know, if you have more questions, you know, we can obviously, you know, have another conversation through MSIP. So.
Thank you, Eric. Let's unmute MD and see what question he has for Eric.
Hey, Eric.
Hey.
Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for being a great mentor. I actually have a question related to something you said earlier. My question really stems from a meeting we had at TCI this Monday, where Bill Ackman, the founder and CEO from Pershing Square Capital, came. The question I was trying to ask is that, is a biotech venture that is led by founder versus a biotech venture led by a business minded person, which one is more favorable to get the most outcome? The reason I asked that is, as you know, like Bill Ackman and Mike Pearson at Valiant, their business model was crazy, and they ended up dropping a lot in their stock prices after their business model, which was a very business-minded approach, buying and acquiring assets from different companies. So in your mind, which one of the venture, founder-led or business-led, is more successful?
Yeah, I guess what I would say, MD, is that it'd be difficult to say that in any one particular situation, like one's better or the other, right? So there are many, many factors that influence these kinds of issues. Again, if we were having that conversation or this conversation in July of 2021, right, when the biotech index was at an all-time high and what have you, right, the answers might be different. But my specific answer to you, and sorry, just to be crystal clear, right, July of 2021 versus now, where, you know, actually the biotech index has started to creep back up a little bit, so it's starting to improve a little, but, you know, it's pretty common to see young publicly traded biotech companies to have lost 70 to 90% of their value, you know, on paper, their market value, over the last year and a half. My answer, MD, is I think you need a balance. I mean, I think a lot of the kinds of companies that we're involved in, or that MSIP helps to create, are companies that seek to develop a drug or a medical device or a diagnostic or a prognostic. And in that kind of a situation, I think you need really good scientists, you need scientific leadership, but you also need good business leadership, because particularly right now in a market like this, investors are very concerned about risk. And so they're more likely to invest in a company that has leadership that they know, that has, you know, built companies before, that has been, you know, ideally has been successful in those companies. And so to me, the answer to your question today is that you have to really understand what is the mission, what is the goal, what is your company trying to do, and balance what it is that you're developing. And that most cases, in terms of what's happening at Mount Sinai, because it's technology focused, is it ultimately is to develop a product. And in that situation, you definitely need strong science, strong product development, strong regulatory, etc.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And by the way, I just want to qualify one of the comments that I made, which is, you know, having an individual who's built a company before, successfully, say, sold that company. There's a lot of value in learning from your mistakes, as well as in, right? So, you know, you have successful entrepreneurs who will say, well, but I wasn't successful my first few tries because I learned a lot, right? And so again, as an investor, when you think about who do you want leading kind of from a financial perspective and what have you, you know, people that have had those successes or failures, but have learned along the way, can be very helpful.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, MD. Just wanted to be mindful of your time, Eric. It's 12:45. Do you think we have time for one more question or?
I'm just checking my calendar.
Okay.
I'm actually available until 1, but whatever you guys find helpful.
Okay. You were speaking about technologies earlier. Where do you see various technologies going in the next few years? So for example, in COVID, there was just an explosion of digital health, for example. What do you think is going to happen in the next few years to drugs, devices, digital health?
I always love the crystal ball question.
Yes.
Or the predicting the future question. It's
Prognostic question.
Healthcare, when you think about healthcare as a market and as a regulated market, it moves slowly. The COVID pandemic created a very special set of circumstances where digital health and the development of digital health, and I'd say more importantly, the adoption of digital health accelerated very rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
And it accelerated rapidly for the reason that we know, right? It was a necessity.
Yeah.
But many things changed very quickly to enable that to happen. Separate, when you think of, okay, there's obviously the pandemic, the disease factor, what have you, but also the government responded very rapidly. Reimbursement frameworks changed almost very rapidly, so that activities that previously we didn't really understand, if you visited with your doctor by phone or by video, it was more complicated in terms of what the reimbursement landscape was there. That all, the development of a structure for that to all occur happened very, very rapidly. That kind of change in the healthcare market is extremely rare. And one of the things that I would, like as an example, think of the number of drugs, of therapeutics that have been on the market and available for decades, right? Or like there's a little change and it gets a little better and a little better. But again, it's been available for many, 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 many years. So you might measure the lifetime of a therapeutic in, well, you not might, but you would measure the lifetime of a therapeutic, a good therapeutic that isn't replaced by something else in terms of decades. So getting back to your specific comment of where do I see things going? I think that the future of healthcare and the future of medicine is going to be significantly linked, or it's something that'll be very important, is diagnostics and prognostics. When I say prognostics, I mean the ability to have some type of a test, some type of a measurement that predicts an individual's either development of a disease or progression of a disease. And so, right, if we think about value-based care, trying to keep people healthy over time, you want to intervene before they're really sick, right? And so again, that's why it brings me back to diagnostics and prognostics.
Yeah.
I think artificial intelligence and machine learning will increasingly be integrated into everything healthcare. I don't think you're going to, it's not a snap of the fingers and all of a sudden everything is touches machine learning or artificial intelligence, but I do think it becomes more and more important. One of the things that, if you're starting a company, particularly where you have a product that involves machine learning or artificial intelligence components, like let's say a diagnostic or a prognostic that has an algorithm component, it's always important to think about, well, how is the regulatory framework evolving or changing? So for example, recently the FDA announced or published a new set of guidelines, I guess I would say, or guidance in terms of how it's going to regulate clinical decision support software. And that I think came out just in September of this year. And it's different from what occurred before. And so, really, thinking about those things and understanding the regulatory framework is going to be important. I do think we'll see a lot of new drugs that are much more targeted, drugs that are, developed because we are getting developed based on a better understanding of biological systems and processes and pathways. One of the comments that I've made over time is that biology is not engineering. And what I mean by that is that in engineering, we kind of know a lot of the rules and how things interact. Whereas in biology, we're getting there, but we still don't understand the intricacies of all the biochemical pathways and how everything's interacting and what, it's incredibly complex. And so, right, if developing drugs or diagnostics or what have you was purely engineering, right, we wouldn't have as many failures as we do. So, but I do think we'll have new developments based on a better understanding of genomics and biological processes. And then what I would say is the convergence of biology, chemistry, engineering, information technology, right? That convergence is going to, only accelerate.
Yep. Great. Thank you so much, Eric. I think we are at time. Just wanted to give you some time before your next meeting. I'm sure on everybody's behalf here. Oh, Ilse, did you have a question? All right.
Hey, Ilse, you're on mute if you have a question.
Hi, this has been really exciting to listen, and particularly to your last point of, where the future is going. I wanted to get your thoughts on, lots of novel technologies that are going out there seeking to cure diseases, and therefore, tackling the genome with these CRISPR technologies. Prime editing just went public a couple of weeks ago, and there's a lot of movement in that space, and I am intrigued about your thoughts and whether there is going to be a wave of investment in that space.
Yeah, I think it's an incredibly exciting space. In some ways, you could almost argue that there was a wave of investment that already occurred related to CRISPR and CRISPR-like technologies. A number of companies were created. And existing companies, of course, are leveraging the technology in various ways as well. One of the challenges, I think from an investment perspective, I think one of the challenges that exists is ultimately how you deliver those kinds of therapeutics and how to do it in a broad enough way that you could create a, quote, cure. I don't view myself as a significant expert in the field. I'm still learning and trying to get to know the field better. And so there's probably people on this call that know a lot more than I do. But I continually go back to how do you deliver how do you formulate the drug? How do you deliver the drug? And then what's the regulatory framework that you're going to have to get through to actually get it approved? But Ilse, I would simply say it's very exciting. We're seeing some really interesting, new therapeutics. I was introduced to one recently. We don't know if it could be curative. It would be something that an individual would have to take their entire life because it's not actual editing, but it's still kind of falls into the nucleic acid-based therapeutic category. So I wish I could be more specific or more complete in my answer to you. I agree with you. It's a super exciting area, and there's a lot that I'm expecting to see out of that field. But there's still challenge. There's, as we know, still significant challenges.
Great. Thank you, Ilse, for your question. Thank you, everybody, for your time today. I hope it was really helpful. If you're interested at all in mentorship, coaching, anything to do with entrepreneurship, please contact Juan. and myself, and we'd be happy to speak with you. Have a beautiful rest of the week and happy
Well,
holidays next week.
I just wanted to say, also just to wrap up, I just wanted to thank everybody for joining today. It's really a great opportunity. I'm honored to be able to spend some time with you. And just to follow up on what Cynthia said is, innovation partners, we're here to be helpful. We're here to be your partners. We're here to work with you. Whether it's, you send a friend to us or you want to work with us, we can be helpful for you. Please don't hesitate to follow up, because that's what we're here for. And just have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday and great rest of your week.
Be well. Bye
Take care.
now.